Aundria Bowman was just 14 when she vanished from her adoptive home in Hamilton, Michigan in 1989. Just a few years later, her missing persons flyer was shown on the big screen at a Soul Asylum concert in Michigan when they played their hit song, Runaway Train. In Aundria's case, what seemed at first like a runaway case soon unraveled into something far darker. Secrets buried under years of lies, suspicion, and ultimately a horrifying truth. Today, we're going to peel back the layers of this decades-old mystery, uncovering the twisted story of Aundria Bowman, the family who raised her, and the justice that came far too late.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes. Okay, Melody, so I'm going to ask you a trivia question. So Lily bought me a true crime trivia game.
That is so cool.
And I'm going to ask you some of the questions, I'm going to ask you a question a week until I run out of questions.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you some questions on your own. Okay.
Perfect. Okay. So the drama Goodfellas and the comedy My Blue Heaven are both loosely based on the real life of what mobster?
I've never seen either of those. Okay, Goodfellas.
You want to do some like A, B, C, D?
Yeah.
Okay. A, Frank Nitti. B, Bugs Morgan. C, Whitey Bulger. Or D, Henry Hill.
Okay. I don't think it was Whitey Bulger because I just recently watched a movie about him.
I want to watch that movie.
It's Johnny Depp.
My sister, she's interested in him. She loves mobsters. Well,
funny.
not like that. She loves to learn about mobsters.
I love Johnny Depp. So.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to stay the Bugs whatever guy.
Bugs Morgan?
Yes.
Okay. It's actually Henry Hill. So it was D.
I've never heard of him.
We'll have to do a gangster episode, maybe together.
Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah, it would. Guys, thank you so much to everybody who has rated our podcast. I just want to let you know that even if you listen to us on Spotify, if you could possibly rate us on Apple and give us 5 stars, and if you could comment, leave us a review. You don't have to say anything big, but just leaving that rating is very important. But if you can only get on Spotify, those ratings help us too, because then other people look on there and they're like, oh, they're a highly rated podcast.
Okay, so let's jump into this story. I watched this on a Netflix documentary this past weekend. Do you watch a lot of those?
Sometimes they scare me.
You've probably heard this story, but I had not. And I'm going to tell you, it was a wild story.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump in, and if you recognize anything, feel free to speak up.
All right. I'm excited.
The name of the documentary on Netflix was The Lost Daughter Into the Fire.
I don't think I have heard of that.
This story starts with Cathy Terkanian.
Okay.
She was a young teen with a rough upbringing. Cathy was the oldest of like 6 kids. And so she was kind of minding the kids a lot. And her mom, she had a stepdad. She didn't get along with them very well. Okay. It was just kind of rough.
Yeah.
Cathy described her mother as being a physical person who smacked her around one too many times. And she eventually got tired of that. And so at the age of 14, Cathy ran away to New Orleans with just the clothes on her back. And this was in the early 70s.
Okay.
And while she was down there, she met a 19-year-old boy by the name of Randy Badger. They hit it off. When she and Randy, they decided to get married. And so at that time, you could go to South Carolina and get married as a minor as long as your parents would sign the papers.
Okay.
So they went to South Carolina, and Cathy's stepfather gladly signed for them to get married.
Okay. He was ready for her to get out too.
They were. They just didn't want to have to, deal with another person in a mouth
or something.
Yeah, exactly. So within a year, Cathy and Randy were expecting a baby. And on June 23rd, 1974, at 16 years old, she gave birth to a beautiful little girl that she named Alexis Miranda Badger.
Oh.
Yeah, and I saw the baby pictures, and she was gorgeous. Cathy was determined to give her baby a better upbringing than she had had. And so she put her full self into being a mom. But when Alexis was only 5 months old, Cathy came home one afternoon to find Randy on the couch kissing another woman.
Oh, gosh.
And Alexis was in the other room in the crib crying and without a diaper. And so she was pretty hot about that.
Sure.
So at that point, she was done with Randy. But she was only 16-year-old.
Oh,
I mean, you know, you were a young mom.
Yes.
That's hard.
My mom was married at 16.
Okay. So, you know, that's not easy raising a child at that young age. And now she's got herself to care for and the baby. So as much as she did not want to do it, she just felt like she had to suck it up and go back home to Virginia and live with her parents. Well, once she got back home, she learned that her mother had been diagnosed with cancer. And her mom was basically expecting Cathy to care for her as well as take care of all these younger siblings that were still at home.
Okay.
And she didn't really seem to be very supportive of Cathy being a mom to her own child.
Right.
She kind of, you know, would say stuff to her, like kind of just looked down on her and was judgmental and just gave little snide comments like, you don't know what you're doing.
Oh, that's so sad.
It really is.
But yet she was good enough to raise her kids pretty much.
Exactly. But it did take a toll on Cathy, and she started wondering, am I going to be able to raise this kid? Am I doing a good job? And then one day she came home and her mom said, you've run out of formula. You don't know what you're doing.
Oh.
And that just really kind of convinced Cathy that she didn't know what she was doing. And her mom was pushing her to place the baby for adoption. And she kept telling her, you know, that she'll have the best life. You can give her to the best people, and you just need to do this. And so when Alexis was 9 months old, Cathy did give her baby up and put her into the adoption system. And that was a heart-wrenching decision for her, but she did it because she felt it was best for her baby.
Right.
Cathy went on, she ended up going to nursing school, and in 1981, she met a man named Ed Terkanian. She met him at a bar, she said the good old-fashioned way. And within days, the two were inseparable. And before she knew it, she had loaded up her stuff and moved to Massachusetts to be with Ed.
Okay.
They were actually married within weeks of meeting, like 10 weeks.
When you know, you know.
Yeah. And they are still together.
Oh.
And that's been like 40 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
So,
Cathy never stopped thinking about that little girl, though. I mean, she had formed a bond with her.
right.
And through the years, you know, she hoped that maybe her daughter would reach out and try to find her, but she never heard anything from her. And it was a closed adoption. So she
Okay.
had no way of knowing where her daughter had been placed or with whom. But then one day in 2010, she received a letter from a social worker that had to do with the adoption agency. And since it had been 35 years since the adoption, Cathy was hopeful, like this letter may be saying, hey, my daughter wants to find me.
Oh.
It didn't say that. The letter actually was informing her that her daughter was a missing person
Oh.
and had been missing since 1989 when she was a 14-year-old freshman in high school.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't that so sad?
That is heartbreaking.
The letter went on to say that an unidentified body had been found along a road next to this cornfield in Wisconsin. They thought it may be possibly her daughter that had been found. She matched some physical characteristics, and the location was just across Lake Michigan from where she had gone missing.
Okay.
And so they were hopeful that Cathy would give a DNA sample so that they could confirm if that was her daughter or not.
Right.
And of course, she was willing to do that. She didn't hesitate. But unfortunately, even though she did that, they still couldn't tell her who had adopted her daughter or anything like that. They couldn't give her any identifying her name, where she was, any of that, because she didn't have those rights, being that it was a closed adoption. Now, you know, today there are a lot more open adoptions.
Sure.
But back then, that was just not the case.
Yeah.
But undeterred, Cathy, she was determined she was going to find out what happened to her child. So she turned to the internet. And this was in 2010. She only had a birthday to go on, but that actually turned out to be enough. Her husband, Ed, ran a quick search for missing persons that had that same birthday, and within minutes, they found one that matched.
Oh, wow.
The young woman that popped up, that was a match, was listed at the top of the Michigan State Police Department missing persons page. This young woman's name was Aundria Michelle Bowman, and she had lived in Hamilton, Michigan before her disappearance. Now, when they showed her picture, she looked just like that woman.
Oh.
Like, I'm sure when she saw it, she thought, that's my daughter.
Oh.
Even though she had not seen her since she was 9 months old, I mean, they look strikingly alike. But that is where the trail ended. She couldn't find any other information on her. She couldn't find the parents' names, so she decided to open up a Facebook page. It was the Find Aundria M. Bowman Facebook page. And she was surprised when she started receiving messages from people who had gone to school with her daughter.
Oh.
That's how she found out that Aundria's adoptive parents' names were Brenda and Dennis Bowman. So Brenda and Dennis, they met and dated in high school. When Dennis finished school, he had joined the Navy. Almost as soon as he returned from boot camp, they got married. Mm. And then shortly after that, he was sent to San Diego. Later, they were stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, at the naval base down there. And then, like many young couples, they were ready to start a family. And then, unfortunately, Brenda had found out she was unable to conceive. So they began the adoption process. And one day, they got the call that there was this little 9-month-old baby girl that needed a home. And they were ecstatic.
Sure.
And they brought her home, and they had named her Aundria Michelle Bowman. Now, eventually, they moved back to Michigan to the town of Hamilton, a sleepy little town tucked between Holland and Dorr. When Aundria was around 13 years old, the family got the shock of their lives. Miraculously, Brenda, who had been told she couldn't have children, found out that she was expecting.
Oh, my gracious.
Yeah. So she actually gave birth to a little girl that she named Vanessa. Oh. And Aundria loved that little baby so much. I mean, that was her baby sister, and she was already a teenager.
Yes.
So she doted on her and did take care of her quite a bit. In 1989, the unthinkable happened. Brenda was heading to work on second shift one evening, and Dennis was going to take her and drop her off. He took 15-month-old baby Vanessa with him so that Aundria could do her homework without the excuse of, oh, I didn't get it done, I had to tend to the baby, kind of thing. Well, Aundria had been struggling at school recently and had been getting in a little bit of trouble. So when Dennis got back home, he arrived to find that Aundria wasn't there. He noticed that some cash from his drawer in his bedroom was missing, about $100. Along with Aundria's purple coat and one of his travel bags.
Okay.
So right away, Dennis called the police and reported a runaway. So the police took the report, and Brenda and Dennis, they told them, they said, well, she had been really easygoing as a kid. And one day it was like the switch flipped, and now she's fighting with them a lot. They said she had once put her fist through the back door window. She had been shoplifting, lying.
Yeah.
And they said she had actually run away before.
Okay.
And she had stayed at a friend's house for a few days before coming back home. They unfortunately said that's probably what's happened again.
Right.
A search begins in their community. People are coming out and they're calling in tips. And there were people that reported they had seen Aundria in Holland, that nearby town to Hamilton.
Okay.
Some people reported that she had left with a trucker, along with other people saying they had spotted her working at a club somewhere. But unfortunately, the trail went cold and nothing. Brenda eventually called the police back, and she said the amount of money was actually $150, not $100. And somehow there's just a difference between those two amounts that tips the scales. That was enough for them to file this report that she had stolen from them.
Okay.
There was this, I don't know if it was a warrant for her arrest, but there was a police report filed that Aundria was the perpetrator and Dennis was this victim of this $150 theft.
Okay.
But Aundria never returned home after that night, and her parents were left to grieve their missing daughter. Now, the unidentified body that had been found along the road in Racine County, Wisconsin, it looked like it was a promising match for the missing Aundria Bowman. Racine is directly across Lake Michigan from Holland. That is the neighboring community. With that location and those similar characteristics, it seemed very possible that that young lady was Aundria. It took 3 years. For
Oh my
3
goodness.
years for the DNA to conclusively come back. And Cathy, the birth mother, was finally informed that the Jane Doe from Racine County was not, in fact, her daughter.
Okay.
That deceased person turned out to be a young lady named Peggy Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
At 19 years old, Peggy had found herself alone and homeless after her mother had passed away. And she had some mental deficiencies
Okay.
and was not really able to take care of herself. But she had met this woman who offered her a job as a housekeeper and a nanny. She went to work for that woman. And unfortunately, that woman named Linda LaRoche turned out to be a horrible abuser and took advantage of Peggy.
Have I heard this story?
I don't know. Have you?
I don't know. Maybe.
Well, she kept her in a crawl space.
I think I've heard this story.
About
that story about her.
Okay, maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what happened to her, but that was not Aundria.
Okay.
And-
that's so sad.
So so she had taken advantage of Peggy and horribly abused her, and then Peggy had turned up deceased along that highway, which is very, very tragic.
That is so sad.
While Cathy was relieved that her daughter had not died in such a horrible manner, and she had some hope, maybe we'll find her alive then,
Yeah.
she was determined, I'm going to find her. Cathy also felt that the police officers back in the 1980s, when Aundria had first gone missing, she didn't feel like they really put a lot of effort into finding Aundria because she was a runaway.
Right. I can see that.
And Cathy had been a runaway herself. And she said, well, they didn't come looking for me. They just, when they think you're a runaway, they don't try as hard.
Right.
And so she felt like they hadn't done a very good job, but she was going to step up and do that job herself now.
I love that.
Yeah. So she spoke with a detective. He was an Allegan County detective who had actually gone to school with Aundria back in high school when she had gone missing as a kid. He was
Wow.
1 year ahead of her.
That is so cool.
And now that he was on the force, it is really cool. He was taking another look at that case. And he assured Cathy, he's like, this case is not closed. I'm going to try my best to help you find her. So one day in May of 2013, on Facebook, on that page, Cathy got a message from a young woman named Meta. And Meta had quite the story to tell Cathy. So she recounted to Cathy, she said, in September of 1989, when I was just 6 years old, she told her she had been abducted from Holland, Michigan, from an area near the Windmill gas station. And she said, given the time frame of the same year and the area so close, their neighboring communities, she felt that her abduction might be connected to Aundria's disappearance.
Oh, wow.
So this is what had happened to Meta. And keep in mind, she is 6 years old. Meta had walked to a friend's house that day when she was approached by a man in a red pickup truck. He told her that her mom said he could take her to see some puppies, and he pulled her into the car. And she wasn't really afraid of him at first because he was acting really nice and he knew her mom,
Oh,
you know,
poor
and he was
baby.
taking her to see puppies. I mean, but after they drove for quite some time, she kept asking, like, she would see a barn. Is that where the puppies are? Is that where the puppies are? And he says, just a little further. And at one point, they did get to an intersection and there was a cop sitting there. And he told her to lay down in the seat. She did trust him, but at that point, she realized his demeanor had changed and she was starting to get scared. Here's a warning for our listeners.
Okay.
This is going to be a little rough. He finally stopped along a rural area near the town of Hamilton, got her out of his truck, and took some rope from the back. He dragged that little girl into the woods, and he took her clothes off. He tied her sweater around her mouth so she couldn't scream, and
oh my gosh.
was in the act of physically assaulting her when some dogs barking spooked him. And he got up and ran off because where the dogs are, usually there's people
Yes.
close by. So when he did that, she was able to untie herself and run away to go to the main road. She was naked. And someone along the highway saw her, and they called police and helped her.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, you can just imagine what would have happened to her had those dogs not come up.
I thank God for those dogs.
I know. Later that evening, at her home, she sat down with a police sketch artist and gave him a description, the best that she could at 6 years old.
Right.
Of him and the truck. Regrettably, though, her abductor had never been caught. But as she grew up, she always wondered, had he had other victims?
Right.
And so she was always watching and reading papers and articles. I'm sure she was traumatized.
Yeah.
And so when she found that Facebook page about Aundria, she thought, maybe those are connected.
Yeah.
Meta took a deep dive into Aundria's disappearance. And she came across a family picture of the Bowmans, and immediately she recognized Dennis as the man who had kidnapped her.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Dennis?
Dennis Bowman.
The
adoptive father of Aundria.
Oh my gosh.
It had been a long time, so some people thought maybe she was mistaken. But then she actually listened to a taped interview he had given when Aundria went missing. And she said she got chills because that was his voice. She said, you may not remember that face, but you remember the voice, and that was him.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Now, Cathy is wondering, okay, did Dennis do something to my daughter?
Right.
And her gut told her yes. And so she decided she was going to go to Michigan and do some sleuthing of her own. So when she got to Michigan, she talked to some old friends of Aundria's, and she began hearing some stories about Aundria being mistreated at home. One friend of Aundria's told Cathy how once Aundria had stayed at her house for 4 days hiding out from her parents. And she had confided to her that Dennis was molesting her.
Oh my gosh.
The girls, Aundria and that friend, she said, you got to go tell somebody. So they went to school officials and reported it. And then the school called the parents in and social services, but they bring them all in the room together. And then they ask her, okay, now what's going on?
Right.
And of course, she doesn't feel confident enough to right there from their faces say that.
Right, of course.
So she just backtracks and retracts it and says nothing. She had made it up. And they sent her back home with them. Her trouble at school was probably a call for help that was ignored, or maybe nobody knew how to answer. I don't know. But she wanted out. And the only reason she had hesitated to run away again was because her little sister Vanessa was still in that home. And she felt like she needed to protect her.
Wow.
So she was trying to stick it out for that reason. But when Aundria was reported as a runaway, just months after she reported being molested and then sent back home with the Bowmans, her friends assumed, oh, she did run away.
Yeah.
And she's probably somewhere living happy, living her
Sure.
best life now. And they hoped, that she was safe. In the days after her disappearance, one of Brenda's the adoptive mother, one of her family members was actually suspicious of Dennis's behavior. So much so that she called authorities with her suspicions that Dennis may have had something to do with this. But for some reason, at that time, nobody really looked that hard at Dennis. If they had, they would have been really surprised of what they learned of his past. Cathy was like a bloodhound on the hunt for her daughter. So she ended up using the Freedom of Information Act to request Dennis's records.
Oh.
And boy, she discovered a bombshell. In 1980, Dennis had attacked a teenager near Holland, Michigan. He had abducted her at gunpoint. Actually, she was riding her bike down the road, and she was forced off of the road by a motorcycle. And then when the guy got off the motorcycle, he pointed a gun at her. He attempted to force her into the woods. I don't know if she froze up or what, but she didn't do it. And he looked at her and he screamed and he fired the gun at her feet, and started screaming threats at her that he was going to shoot her. And he fired it at her again. And she was just standing there trying to think, what do I do? And luckily, she stalled long enough that a truck came up the road about that time. And when Dennis heard the truck, he turned to look. She jumped on her bike and took off. She flagged down another truck for help, and they threw her bike in the back, and they took her to call for help.
Oh, my gosh. So they would have already had Aundria with them.
Yes, Aundria was, I'll tell you about that. There's a quote from him about that in just a second about that. So the police were called, and later that day, a suspect that matched the description that the woman gave them, they picked up a man that matched the description, and she confirmed, yeah, that's him. That was Dennis. And when they picked him up, he told authorities, you got to let me go. I have to go pick up my little girl from school. So Aundria was 6 years old at that time.
Oh, my gosh.
So he was charged with attempted murder, and he pled to assault with intent to commit criminal sexual conduct.
He pled to that?
Yes. And the court concluded that he was a danger to women unless he was confined. In February of 1981, he was sentenced to 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
He served 5 for that offense and was released when Aundria was 11.
Oh, my gosh.
And nobody could believe that Brenda stayed with him, and especially when he came back home and she's got this young 11-year-old daughter in the home. But she did.
Oh, my gosh.
And then in 1998, several years after Aundria had been missing, police responded to an alarm at the home of a lady named Vicki Vandenbrink. When they got there, they found Dennis leaving the back door of her trailer. This was after he's already served time for that other offense.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, he explained to them, oh, I know Vicki. She's a former coworker, and I've been staying with her. So they let him go for the moment. But when they asked Vicki about it to confirm the story, she said, no, he's lying.
She didn't know him at all.
I don't know if she knew him at all, but she said he had not been staying with her. So then they go back to Dennis, and he told them, changed his story again. He said, well, I needed to use the bathroom. And since I was somewhat acquainted with her because my daughter had sold her some Girl Scout cookies once.
Oh, my gosh.
I didn't think she would mind if I went in and used her bathroom.
Oh, my gosh.
I know. So the police asked him, they said, well, can we search your property? And he consented to a search.
Okay.
And in an outbuilding on that property, they found a black travel duffel bag that contained some of Vicki's underclothes, a short-barreled shotgun, a black sweatshirt, and a mask. Now, the reason they had answered the alarm at that woman's trailer to begin with was that she had had several break-ins. And so they had put a security system up, and that security system caught him. So they felt like Dennis probably was responsible for every one of those break-ins. And the fact of what was in that bag, like he obviously was planning to go in and assault her.
Please tell me he got time for that.
Well, he pled guilty to 1 count of breaking and entering, and his lawyers presented letters written on his behalf from several people. His boss, a counselor from his sex offender treatment program that he was in.
That's really working.
Right. The principal of Vanessa's school, and a congregant of Christ Memorial Church, where Dennis had taught Sunday school to kindergartners.
Oh, my gosh.
For the past 6 years. And, of course, his wife, Brenda, wrote a letter on his behalf as well.
She's sick.
Yeah, she is. And when Dennis spoke in court on behalf of himself, he told the judge he was a happily married man of 28 years. He said, I have 2 daughters, a 25-year-old and an 11-year-old. And he made no mention that his 25-year-old daughter had been missing for over a decade. I mean, how many times is this guy going to fall through the cracks before something worse happens? Yeah. After Cathy found out all of that from that Freedom of Information Act, she didn't have a gut feeling. She knew this is the man. He is responsible for my daughter's disappearance, and he's done something to her. And she was determined to prove that. So over the years, she made several trips to Michigan. She worked with some other detectives and private detectives all through those years. And she began telling anybody that would listen exactly who she thought was responsible. She did not mind rattling cages to get somebody to listen to her.
Good.
She put out missing persons posters. She talked to the community, and she began watching the Bowman house.
Mm.
She had this gut feeling that Dennis had killed Aundria and buried her in their backyard. Now, she didn't really have anything to go on for that belief. It was just her mother's instinct, but she couldn't get away from that idea. But the problem with that theory was that the Bowmans had not lived in that house when Aundria had gone missing. They had moved shortly after her disappearance. So that wasn't where they lived.
Okay.
Pretty unlikely he's going to move some remains.
Sure.
But Cathy was looking at that property on Google Earth, and she was flying drones over his house.
Oh,
I mean, like, she is tenacious.
Wow.
She began calling their house. And she would say, I know you did it. I know you know, she was just not letting go of this.
Yes.
She even put up a missing persons billboard along the highway that he had to drive to get home.
Good.
She was taunting him. Yeah, I like this woman a lot.
Yes.
Get this. She posted that accusation that he had killed her and buried her in the backyard. She posted that online. She started putting it on like Facebook pages and other stuff. She wrote things like, "Karma is the most patient gangster ever."
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
She's awesome.
She is awesome. And she also posted, "Dennis Lee Bowman of Hamilton, Michigan, murdered 14-year-old Aundria Bowman and buried her in his backyard. You diggin'? We're watching."
Wow. Wow.
The Bowmans were getting agitated by this.
I'm
like,
sure.
They were like, she's harassing us.
Mm-hmm.
And Brenda even threatened to take out papers on Cathy for that harassment. But Cathy, she didn't care. She just kept
Cathy
right on.
Don't sound like she cares.
She kept right on. And there is nobody more tenacious than a woman determined to find her child.
Mm-hmm. And how sad for her, thinking that she was giving her daughter a better life.
Oh, I know.
So I'm sure all wrapped up in that, there's got to be guilt.
Yes.
And regret.
In that documentary, she shares a little bit of that. Like, you know, that's exactly what she said. I thought I was giving her a better life.
Yeah.
So I do want to talk about that in a little bit. So then in 2013, Cathy attended this missing persons conference that was held in Michigan. And lo and behold, Brenda Bowman was there with her daughter Vanessa at that same conference.
Wow.
And Cathy couldn't help herself. Like, she confronted Brenda. She started saying, "Yeah, Brenda, tell him who Dennis is. Tell him what he's done."
Wow.
She was going off. And Vanessa, now you got to think, Vanessa was a baby, and she's been raised by these people. This is her parents.
Right.
So she, of course, is believing them. So she was trying to defend her mom, who's being verbally attacked. And so she had to be held back by this male attendee at the conference. I mean, it got loud and it got ugly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just because Cathy's tenacious and has a gut feeling, police can't just go dig up somebody's yard based on that, especially since that wasn't even the same yard.
Yeah, exactly.
So they just didn't have anything conclusive that they could do to get Dennis on at all. I mean, they didn't even have a body. So they don't know that even Aundria's dead. She could still be alive.
Right. She could have ran away.
Exactly. Cathy decided she hired a private investigator in Michigan. His name was Jeffrey Floor. And he managed to get a hold of Aundria's police file. And everybody was surprised that that record didn't start with her disappearance that night. There was a document in that folder from 4 months prior when police had responded to allegations of abuse in the home.
Wow.
The file didn't say what that was. It just said that the allegation had been determined to be false, and there were no further details. But there was another document in there showing Aundria as the perpetrator of theft from Dennis and him as the victim.
That's sickening.
It is so sickening, so so infuriating, really.
Because not only, now he's trying to mar her reputation.
Yes, exactly. And it was obvious that, this system has obviously miserably failed this young woman, wherever she ended up. Like, so many times she's already been failed.
That's
and
so
now,
sad.
really, you have that? At this point, Cathy really can't get any further. So she was just really hoping for a break in the case.
Yeah.
And finally, in 2019, she got a call from Meta.
Okay.
Meta was that 6-year-old girl who is now grown up.
Yes.
And Meta, as soon as she answered the phone, Meta said, "They got him." She said the police are all over his property. Dennis Bowman had been picked up by police, and his yard was crawling with officers and cars and everything.
Oh, my goodness.
At the station, there's a detective, Detective Squires. He asked Dennis, "Do you know why you've been picked up?" And he's like, "I have no freaking idea." And Dennis is acting belligerent and kind of smarting off to detectives.
Of course he is.
And he says, "Are you going to tell me why I was arrested?" And the detective said, "Absolutely. I'm the guy you've been watching over your shoulder for years." He laid his badge on the desk, and Dennis kind of looks at it and says, "Good for you. You're a Norfolk cop." And the detective quipped back, "Yep, and you're under arrest for the homicide in 1980 of the fighter pilot's wife in Virginia."
Oh, my gosh.
You
What?
didn't see that coming, did you?
No.
I know. That young wife was Kathleen Doyle, the daughter of a naval officer and now the wife of a fighter pilot. In 1980, Kathleen was at her home in Norfolk, Virginia, while her husband was deployed in the Indian Ocean. She was just 25 years old, and they had only been married like 9 or 10 months. They were newlyweds, pretty much. She was a beautiful young woman with auburn hair, green eyes, and that Irish complexion. She was described as independent, brave, and adventurous. She loved sailing from a young age. Her dad had introduced her to sailing, and she loved traveling. She had actually done some traveling, even though she was only 25. And at just under 5 feet tall, she was just full of personality and very smart. She aspired to be a writer. A page that had been left in Kathleen's journal just a week before she died said, "I've often wondered what prompts writers to write. Somewhere along the line, I developed the urge too. I know I'm not ready for the written word. I feel I must have many more years of living yet before I write something worthwhile." And those were the last words that she wrote.
Oh, my gosh.
I know. So on September 9th, 1980, her good friend Vivian had come over to visit. She and Vivian were hanging out. They shared a bottle of wine, had a couple of glasses each. And Vivian and her husband had kind of been keeping an eye out for Kathleen while her husband, Stephen, was deployed. And on that evening, they had wrapped things up around 9:30 p.m., and Vivian had left for home. Well, Vivian didn't hear from Kathleen the next day. That was the 10th. But on the 11th, when she still was not able to get in touch with her, she and her husband decided to go over to the house and check.
Yeah.
They found the door ajar, and they entered the house. They immediately noticed the wine glasses from the night before were still out, which was odd. And then they came to the bedroom, and that's when they saw Kathleen's lifeless body on the floor.
Oh, bless her heart.
When police arrived on the scene, they found the young woman had been brutally assaulted.
Okay.
I'm going to give a warning. This is pretty detailed, too, and kind of rough. The mattress was half pushed off the bed spring. Kathleen's body was on the floor, undressed. There was a circular burn mark on her right cheek. It looked like it came from maybe a cigar. She had been strangled with a piece of electrical cord around her neck and stabbed numerous times.
Oh, my gosh.
And her body was riddled with bruises. It was overkill. And many times that does suggest like a spouse.
Yeah.
But I mean, her spouse, his alibi was airtight. He was, he's out in the middle of the ocean.
Right.
So police knew that it wasn't him. But they did feel like whoever had done this was not their first killing. At first, that burn on her cheek had, like I said, had appeared to be from a cigar, but later they found a Lincoln log in the trash can, and it had a charred end on it and had been used to burn her. There was nothing left behind that gave any clues as to who had done this. Homicide and rape units were dispatched to the house. There were no fingerprints found other than Vivian, her husband's, and her friends. There was seminal fluid on the bedspread, and they did perform a rape kit on Kathleen. But this was the days before DNA technology.
Right.
I mean, this was 1980. So even though they had those things, they couldn't get really any real information from it.
Right.
The fingerprint was actually their better option. And there was no prints left behind.
Yeah.
This was a military community, and just a few weeks before, another wife in the area had been murdered in her home while her husband was deployed.
Oh.
At first, they focused on neighbors and military men who were not deployed, but after they ruled out everybody they could, there simply was nothing new to go on. And the woman that had been murdered 3 weeks earlier, they actually did get somebody for her murder, and it wasn't the same person who had been in this home.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, this case also went cold, and it stayed that way for 40 years. Kathleen's father, Captain O'Brien, spent the rest of his life searching for his daughter's killer until his death in 2016.
That's so sad.
So 2 years after Kathleen's father had passed away without knowing who murdered his daughter, Detective John Smith of the Norfolk Police Department was transferred to the cold case unit. When he reviewed Kathleen's case file, he found those 2 DNA specimens that had been left behind by the offender, and they were still in storage. And now the technology had caught up.
Right.
So the bedspread DNA was sent to be tested, and using this, they were able to develop a male profile of the offender, and then they were able to use genealogy websites and science to compile a list of 31 men who were possible matches in this case.
Wow.
And he began working his way through that list to try to see if any kind of match, or if there were a relative maybe that even matched. And then he got a lucky break, if you believe in luck.
I don't.
I don't either. I believe in Providence, though.
Yes.
Detective John Smith, he attended a Homicide Detectives Association conference in Norfolk that year. And one of the names on that list of possible DNA matches was Dennis Bowman. Smith had noticed that Dennis was a suspect in the 1989 disappearance of his adopted daughter. And then he found those other offenses in Michigan that Dennis had served time for in the early 80s. So while he's pondering this and thinking, this might be a match, he met someone at the conference that was from Michigan. And that person was Brian Fuller.
Was that the friend that went to school with her?
Yes.
Okay.
He was the detective in Michigan who had gone to school with Aundria. And he happened to be at that conference in Norfolk.
Yes. That Providence for sure.
Yeah. And Detective Smith says to him, this is what I have going on. And he explains his case to him. And Detective Fuller looks at him and he says, I know him. And I know his family. And that's probably your guy.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy, though?
That is insane.
So now Detective Smith knew his job. He's going to have to either prove or disprove that Dennis Bowman was in Norfolk in September 1980 when Kathleen was killed. But there was only one little problem. See, Dennis had already been apprehended for attacking that teenage girl in May of 1980. And Detective Smith knew, he wouldn't be let out of jail for such a serious charge as attacking that girl on her bike.
Yeah.
So he's like, that doesn't seem like there's any way Dennis could be 600 miles away where Kathleen was killed in September. He would have had to be incarcerated. But you got to give Detective Smith props for his gumshoe work.
Oh, my God. This is crazy.
It is crazy. He pulled the transcripts from Dennis's arrest for that charge in 1980 and read through those. And what he found was a document from Dennis's attorney that showed Dennis did not attend his court hearing for that charge. As a member of the Navy, he was away at a 2-week summer camp that was required for his military service. And do you want to guess where that was?
Oh my gosh. In Norfolk, Virginia.
It was. And that document was dated September 16th, 1980.
That is insane.
So that placed Dennis in Norfolk at the time and that Kathleen was murdered.
Wow.
So now Detective Smith says, okay, I just need to get Dennis's DNA.
Yeah.
He knew there was not a chance Dennis is going to willingly comply to that.
Sure.
So they devise this plan, and they know the Bowmans are upset with Cathy for harassing them.
Mm-hmm.
They tell the Bowmans, why don't you come down to the station and talk to us about what we can do about Cathy? And the Bowmans come down to the station, and while they're sitting there, they're like, oh, would you like something to drink?
Oh, my goodness.
And everybody,
they're geniuses.
They are. Everybody gets something to drink. And Dennis is, whining and complaining like, she's a crazy lady and she's lying on me and all of those things. But when he gets up and leaves, he leaves his cup right there on the desk. And that cup is collected. It's sent off for DNA testing. And it is a 100% match for Dennis Bowman.
Wow.
So now they can arrest him for Kathleen's murder. That is excellent police work. I love it.
Wonderful.
They bring Dennis in to interrogate him because of this, and they have the match. And I got to give this Detective Smith some props for this because he handles Dennis like a master detective. He let Dennis think he was in control of this interrogation. Smith is patient. He's calm. He kind of comes across as a confidant, like I'm here to help you. And he just let Dennis talk. And Dennis talked and talked. At one point, he talked about how his mother was cold-hearted, never once said she loved him. He just allows him to keep on. And finally, Dennis admitted to Kathleen's murder and gave a full confession. Now, this is his confession. He had been extremely drunk that night when he left a bar walking in 1980. Mm-hmm. And when he was walking home, he saw Vivian leave that house. He probably thought it was her house.
Right.
So assuming nobody was in there, he went in looking for money to steal, breaking in. And he came upon Kathleen in the home, and they struggled. And he accidentally stabbed her because of how she was struggling.
And he accidentally burnt her in the face?
Exactly. So he it was minimizing it and kind of almost painting it like it's her fault.
Right. She just shouldn't have attacked him.
Exactly. Which is typical.
They always do that.
Yep.
Because when they talk, they realize what monsters they are.
Yes. And they realize that they're letting that out. Mm-hmm. They're letting somebody see that.
Yeah.
Well, at one point in the questioning, he starts describing a demon that he says caused him to commit the murder. He drew a demon on paper, and he claimed that this demon was controlling him. And during that point, he's kind of quiet and pensive, and he described that this demon was trying to get out, but he wouldn't let it. And then Detective Smith confronted him with those horrible details of how how her body had been so brutally assaulted. And then Dennis starts backtracking. Oh, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. And Detective Smith says to him, you beat the hell out of that girl, and you stabbed the hell out of that girl. Mm-hmm. And Dennis just keeps saying, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. But Smith knows he's got the information he needed from Dennis. He's got that confession, so he gets up and leaves. And even after he leaves, you can still see Dennis in the room because he's on a recording. And he's saying, I didn't do that. And then he says, I did it again. I've done it again.
Oh, my gosh.
So now detectives can focus on whether Dennis was involved in Aundria's disappearance. They decide they're going to use Brenda and their relationship to try and get something out of him. At this point, Dennis is facing charges in Virginia for murdering Kathleen, which is 600 miles away from his family. And they know it's going to be hard for them to visit. So they say, well, we'll consider allowing you to be charged in Michigan if we can find out what you did there. And that way, if you get time, you'll be in prison there near your family.
Smart.
But only if you tell us the truth about her disappearance, because we have to charge you with that one. Dennis refuses to give it up. There's even a video of a call between him and his wife while he's in prison. And, everything's being intercepted.
Yes.
And he's on the phone saying to his wife, they don't get it. I tell them, you don't kill family. You get mad at them, you scream at them, but you don't kill family. I mean, I guess it's okay to kill other people, but not your family.
Idiot.
And his wife keeps saying, well, don't admit to something you didn't do. And his daughter, Vanessa, is on the phone saying, yeah, they came out to the property and they've dug holes all in the yard and in the dog's area.
How are they defending him when they know he's murdered a woman?
I don't know. I mean,
like they know what a crazy, or what an evil person he is.
Honestly,
he's already admitted to murdering. He's already admitted to sexually assaulting children and teenagers.
Well, he had not admitted to that.
Well, the first girl.
That first girl was, I guess technically.
The meta, he
had not ever, yeah. Honestly, the whole time, it's like you said about his wife, Brenda, she was sick, man.
Yes.
She supported him through all of this. And I will tell you some of her comments at the end. Now they can search the property. Okay. Because they're looking for evidence of anything from Kathleen's murder, and they're looking for evidence of Aundria. So they're on that property digging, but that was unsuccessful. They didn't find anything there. No matter how convinced Cathy was that her daughter was there, they didn't find anything. They did not give up, though. They just kept pushing him. And finally, Dennis asked to meet with his wife, Brenda. So they got special permission.
Okay.
For his wife to visit, because prior to that, it was just phone calls. And Dennis started talking. And he actually said to the detectives, I hope you have your cameras rolling for this. And it's all on video. He confesses to his wife. He says Aundria is dead and has been from the start.
Oh, my God.
He describes to his wife, this is the first story he gives. He gives several different versions of this story. He said he arrived home after taking Brenda to work that day, and the baby was asleep. He laid her down, and he didn't see Aundria anywhere in the house. And he walked upstairs, and he saw Aundria coming out of their bedroom. And he asked her why she was in there, and she said she'd been asleep. They argued about it, and she said she was going to leave. And he said, you're not going anywhere. And then she said, I'll tell the counselor again that you molested me, which he says is a lie, that she's making this lie up.
Oh, I'm sure.
And he said, no, you won't. And he says he hit her. And when he did, he said she fell down the stairs. And at that point, when he goes down there, he describes it like she has a broken neck. And Brenda is bawling on the video at this point. Bawling. I guess she really believed him before.
Yeah.
He continues telling her, he's like, well, I knew I would go back to prison if that had happened. And so he said he had wrapped her in a blanket, put her body in the barn, and then reported her missing. And he said he found a cardboard barrel, and he tried to put her body in it, but it wouldn't fit. So he told Brenda he had to cut her legs off.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, he is horrible. Then he explains that he had to wait a day or two, but he put the barrel out with the neighbor's garbage cans, and then the next day it was gone. And even while Brenda is sobbing, she continues to support him. She said, well, I understand why you were fearful, but you still should have told me.
Oh, my gosh.
Now, I'm going to tell you, these video calls between the two, they are absolutely bizarre. These two are demented. At one point, he says, well, just because she broke her neck doesn't mean I didn't love her. And notice he says there that she broke her neck.
Right, of course.
It didn't have anything to do with him.
He didn't do it.
And at one point, Brenda's on the phone with him. She's telling him about a phone conversation she had with a family member. Mm-hmm. And she said, Sue talks like you just chopped Aundria up while she was still alive. And I told her, you don't know half of what you think you know.
Oh,
like, she says that so flippantly.
She's defending him. He's a murderer. He's a woman murderer.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh.
A sexual predator.
Yes.
A murderer. And he has dismembered their daughter. And she says that so flippantly.
That's crazy.
At one point, Dennis is talking to detectives, and he tells them, well, the best lie is the one that's mostly true, right?
What?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Like, he's just throwing it all out there, I guess. So they are intercepting their letters between each other, and they notice that he's telling different details now in these letters. And in one letter, he gives Brenda these really odd details about how he says he wrapped the body up and he sprinkled cinnamon and spices on it and like flower petals and prayed over it and did all this stuff. And
pooed.
Yeah, just ridiculous. like he's trying to make it sound like he was so honorable the way he did away with her and did her, it was an accident that she broke her neck and he did this for her. It's sickening, really.
Yeah.
It's just weird. After he kept writing different versions in his letters, detectives say, look, you got all these discrepancies and you need to come forward and tell us where she's at, really.
Mm-hmm.
And he would get belligerent with them. They say to him, look, you're the only person who can tell us where she's at. And he's like, and I'm the one person that's going to keep that for the rest of my life.
Oh, my gosh.
Just smug and like he's playing a game with them. Detectives, they're getting tired of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So they convince Brenda, look, you're going to have to get him to tell us where Aundria is. We're not charging you in Michigan until we have a body. So if you want to be close to your family, we're not charging you without a body.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's any hope, you got to come out with it. And so she tells him, and that works. So Dennis calls Brenda, and he tells her, and guess where Aundria is?
In their house?
In their backyard.
Wow.
Just like Cathy had thought.
Always said.
All along. He had put her in a barrel, as he said. He had buried her in the backyard of their previous house where they were living when she died. And then when they decided to move, he dug the barrel up and brought it to the new house and reburied it there. So when anthropologists came out to search, they found her exactly where he said they would. Aundria's remains were in 4 different bags in the barrel.
Wow.
Along with a trash bag of diapers.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, and probably to mask the smell.
Right.
They found a peppermint patty paper in one of the bags, and there was a date on that paper that said 1989. And they knew she had been in that barrel from the very day that she supposedly had gone missing.
My gosh.
That poor young girl.
Oh, I know. No telling what she dealt with in her short life.
I know. Yeah, her birth mom was just so sick about that. Just when she thinks about it, it's just hard.
Yeah.
Okay, and then on one of those recorded phone calls, Brenda asked Dennis, like, well, why did you tell me that crazy story about how you buried her and all of that? And he said it was to make her feel better. And then he said, but it didn't make you feel better. You've only been bitching about how you wanted her right there with you, sitting on a shelf. He said, I thought if you thought she had a proper burial, it'd make you happy, but no.
Oh, my gosh.
And then she cries on the phone and says, well, I don't want you mad.
What?
Yes. I mean, who are these people?
Oh, my gosh.
Doesn't that just make you so mad at her?
Yes, it does. She needs a good slap.
Yeah. Well, I bet you Cathy has really wanted to slap her many times. And then he said, well, now you know I'm a rotten, stinking son of a bitch. And she said, well, nothing's changed. I still love you.
Oh, my gosh.
I think she should be in prison with him.
She should.
I mean, she didn't know what had happened. So I can't say she was an accomplice to murder, but I think she knew everything else.
Yes.
Or at least enough. And,
yes.
And she needs to be right there with him. Well, now that Dennis's serial crimes had caught up to him, he also admitted to other crimes. That when they had been stationed in San Diego when he was stationed in San Diego before they were married, that he had sexually assaulted a woman then. That shortly after they were married, he had sexually assaulted 2 other women in San Diego. He always denied being the one that had abducted the 6-year-old little girl, but nobody believes that.
Right.
Metta's
of course he did.
Metta says, no, I know that was him.
Yeah.
Brenda had Aundria's remains cremated. She offered half of those remains to Cathy, and Cathy was offended by that. She said, I should have all of those. That's my daughter, and I should have those remains. And so now she's fighting to try to get all of them.
Good.
And in another phone call yet between Dennis and Brenda, you can hear them discussing that. And Dennis contemptuously says, well, she's the one that threw her daughter away. Can you believe him?
No, you threw her daughter away.
Exactly. I mean, that just pisses me off.
Yes.
Women who place their children for adoption are trying to give them a better life. They are not throwing their children away.
No, they're not.
And Cathy thought that's what was going on. She had no idea that these monsters were getting her. And how did they even get through the adoption system?
I know.
I mean, I know now it's harder, but was it just not that hard in the 70s?
I mean, probably there was no way to vet like there is now.
Yeah.
State to state.
Yeah, that's true. And without the internet, too.
Right.
Yeah, I guess you're right. But it just made me mad that you've got this sorry piece of crap throwing shade at Cathy and her parenting choices instead of taking responsibility for his own actions. Still.
And what happened was he probably just was sexually assaulting her and it got out of hand.
So Dennis pled no contest to the second-degree murder of Aundria Bowman. He was sentenced to 35 to 50 years. And in one more act of justice, he was sent back to Virginia for the murder of Kathleen Doyle.
Good.
They denied him the chance to stay in Michigan with his family, which...
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah, thank God. And he is currently serving 2 life sentences in Virginia for that. Police do suspect that there are more victims of Dennis Bowman's crimes. And that's the story of Kathleen Doyle and Aundria Bowman and countless other people.
That is unbelievable. Oh my gosh. That mother, I just have so much respect for her for not, she definitely did have a bond with her.
Yes.
To have been able to see that through, she definitely had a bond with her. And just the investigators, I'm just so thankful for them and that they saw it through, because they could have been like, well, there was no way he did it because he was, in jail. They could have.
But just kept finding those details.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a crazy story. Those sure were some hard times.
Yeah, they were.
I remember Soul Asylum's Runaway Train being played on MTV when I was in my early teens, but I didn't remember them being so creepy. I went back and watched the original video, and the first thing I thought was, these fellers has definitely been a part of at least one kidnapping. A good way to help protect your children from being kidnapped is letting them listen to hard times and true crimes at night when they go to bed. They may become nonverbal for a while, but at least they won't be talking to strangers. So you make sure you download every episode of Hard Times and True Crimes. Like and subscribe, buy the girls a coffee, and tell everybody you know, and the few people you don't, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.